Good afternoon, Miss Nadia. My name is Alvin Chung. Today's detailed presentation examines the intricate legal dispute between State America and State Botuna concerning a bilateral treaty governing a joint dam project on a shared river. The key legal issues to be analyzed are treaty suspension, material breach, the doctrine of Rebel Six Tenetables, and the evocation of jus cogens norms, as governed by the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties 1969. Firstly, the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties 1969 provides the essential legal framework for assessing treaty-related dispute. The preamble of the Vienna Convention underscores the significance of treaties as instrument of peaceful international cooperation, founded on the principle of free consent, good faith, and notably pacta sunt servanda, meaning agreement must be honored in good faith, citing Article 26 of Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties 1969. So, what is a treaty? In international law, treaties are foundational instruments that govern relations between states, facilitating cooperation, stability, and mutual obligation. Under Article 21A of the Vienna Convention of the Law of Treaties 1969, a treaty is defined as an international agreement concluded between states in written form and governed by international law, whether embodied in a single instrument or in two or more related instruments, regardless of its designations. In the book named International Law, a Treatise, Oppenheim mentioned that international treaties are agreements of a contractual character between states or organization of states, creating legal rights and obligations between the parties. Beside that, George defined treaty as a consensual and engagement which subject of international law have undertaken towards another with the intent to create legal obligations under international law. The significance of treaties is underscored in the preamble of the Vienna Convention, highlighting their crucial role in maintaining international peace and security, promoting friendly relations, and fostering cooperative interactions among nations. Moreover, treaties embody essential principles such as pacta sunt servanda, meaning agreement must be honored in good faith, thereby ensuring predictability and stability in international affairs. The Vienna Convention, widely recognized as codifying customary international law, serves as the primary legal framework for interpreting, forming, preserving, invalidating, suspending, and terminating treaties, playing an indispensable role in the system management of international relations. For instance, in Namibia Advisory Opinion 1971, the International Court of Justice was requested by the United Nations Security Council to provide an advisory opinion regarding to continue presence of South Africa in Namibia despite the UN General Assembly revoking South Africa mandates over Namibia due to violations of its international obligations, particularly apartheid policies. South Africa refused to withdraw and continued to administer the territory. The International Court of Justice ruled South Africa occupation unlawful, reinforcing that serious violations of international obligation justified termination of mandates. Crucially, the ICJ affirmed that provision on treaty termination due to breaches, as codified the Vienna Convention of the Law of Treaties 1969, represented customary international law. Additionally, the court emphasized that other states must not recognize or support situations arising such illegality, underlying the principle of non-recognition in international law. The primary justification advanced by Armica for suspending the treaty relates to Botuna alleged material breach, specifically regarding to the repeated failure to uphold environment safeguard outlined in the treaty. According to Article 60 of the VCLT 1969, treaty suspension of termination is permissible upon a material breach, defined as a substantial violation undermining the treaty's essential object. The International Court of Justice, ruling in the Nagimoros Project 1997 case, uphold this principle. In this case, the court emphasized the unilateral suspension should follow proportional and good faith attempts at negotiation, highlighting the necessity of diplomatic engagement prior to suspension. Further, in Namibia Advisory Opinion 1971, where the ICJ recognized Article 60 of the VCLT 1969 as reflective of customary international law, solidifying the legitimacy of treaty suspension or termination on account of breach. In practical terms, Amica must convincingly establish not only the occurrence but also substantial impact of Botuna's environmental breach on the treaty's purpose, requiring comprehensive documentation of breaches and failed diplomatic negotiations. In response, State Botuna invokes the doctrine of Rayburg Six Tendables, codified under Article 62 of the VCLT 1969, arguing that unforeseen and significant impacts of change of circumstances have fundamentally altered the circumstances under which the treaty obligations were initially agreed. Rayburg Six Tendables allow treaty suspension or termination where a fundamental and unforeseen change radically transforms treaty obligations. However, the jurisprudence underscore its stringent application. The fishery jurisdiction case in 1973 interpreted Rayburg Six Tendables restrictively, emphasizing that mere difficulties, hardship, or inconvenience cannot justify invocation, rather than there must be a drastic or radical alteration of the obligation very nature. In this case, Iceland unilaterally extended its fisheries jurisdiction from 12 to 50 nautical miles in 1972, violating a prior agreement with the UK. Iceland claimed a fundamental change of circumstances, citing depletion of fish stocks. The ICJ rejected Iceland's claims, ruling that the circumstances cited did not constitute a fundamental or unforeseen change sufficient to terminate the treaty. The court upheld treaty stability, adopting a strict interpretation of the Rayburg Six Tendables principle. Similarly, in Tech Hughes 1920, a dispute arose regarding inheritance rights under a treaty between the US and Austria-Hungary. Following World War One, the US entered a state of war with Austria-Hungary, which raised questions on the continued validity of treaty provision protecting inheritance rights. The court ruled that war does not automatically terminate all treaty provision, particularly private rights such as inheritance. The decision emphasized that treaty obligations affecting private individuals can persist despite hostilities between states. The court reinforced the fundamental rights within treaties may survive political disputes unless explicitly terminated. Botuna's arguments upon providing climate change impacts are indeed profound, unforeseen, and beyond normal variation, fundamentally altering their capacity to comply. Botuna further condensed the environmental obligations, specifically access to clean water, have evolved into jus cogens norm, reinforced by recent UN General Assembly resolutions. Article 53 of VCLT 1969 states that treaty is void if, at the time of its conclusion, it conflicts with the jus cogens norm, also known as permanent norm of the general international law. Jus cogens norms are universally accepted fundamental principles that cannot be overwritten. Examples included prohibition against genocide, slavery, torture, and aggressions. This norm can only be altered by subsequent norms of the same peremptory status. Article 53 ensures certain core international legal principles prevail over conflicting treaty obligations, reflecting international consensus on fundamental moral and legal standards. In 1996, the International Court of Justice was requested by the United Nations General Assembly to issue an advisory opinion on whether the threat or use of nuclear weapons were permissible under international law. The court recognized that environmental protection is a vital concern of international law, stating explicitly the state must ensure that their activity does not cause significant environmental harm to other states or areas beyond national jurisdiction. However, the ICJ refrained that classifying this environmental obligation explicitly as jus cogens norms. Instead, it emphasized the importance of balancing environmental protection with states' sovereign rights and obligations related to self-defense and security. Acknowledging the international community's increasing recognition of environmental protection but leaving its peremptory status unresolved. The Barcelona traction case concerned a dispute between Belgium and Spain arising from alleged harm inflicting on a Canadian company operating in Spain, with Belgium representing the interests of its nation who were shareholders. The ICJ dismissed Belgium's claims, citing jurisdiction issues. However, the court significantly introduced the concept of obligation erga omnes, obligation owned by states towards the international community as a whole rather than a merely towards individual states. Example given included prohibition against genocide and slavery. Although environmental protection was not explicitly mentioned, the landmark concept of obligation erga omnes opened possibility for critical norms, potentially including significant environmental principles to growing acknowledgement by the ICJ of the international community's evolving recognition of environmental norm as increasing important, possibly leading towards recognition as peremptory obligation in the future, though the recognition remains incomplete and implicit. Statutory law relevant to transboundary water management, including the Convention of the Law of the Non-Navigational Use of International Water Courses 1997, further bolster environmental obligations. Article 5 and Article 7 specifically promote equitable and reasonable utilization of shared resources and mandate states to prevent significant transboundary harm, respectively, underscoring Botuna duties to uphold environmental safeguard. Extensive academic literature also addressed these evolving principles. In Law of Treaties 1961, Bishop provides a cautious and analytical view of doctrine of Rebook 6 tendables, or thing standing, which allows for the termination of suspension of treaties due to a fundamental change of circumstances. Bishop acknowledges that the doctrine is a necessary safety value in treaty law, but warns that it poses a risk to treaty stability and pacta sunt servanda if applied too broadly. Bishop critiques how Rebel 6 tenets have been inconsistently invoked by states to escape obligations that have become inconvenient rather than truly impossible. He emphasized that international law must strictly limit the doctrine's application to only the most serious, unforeseen, and fundamental change. Bishop analysis helped shape the cautious approach that would later be reflected in Article 62 of the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties 1969. Fitzmaurice also provided a nuanced analysis of Rebel 6 tenets, emphasizing careful, context-specific application to avoid undermining treaty stability in exceptional circumstances and treaty termination 2006. Stephen McCaffrey in his journal article The Law of International Watercourse, Non-Navigational User 2001 articulates the progressive reinforcement of environmental obligation, proposing a trajectory towards potential jus cogens recognition. Alan Boller similarly highlights the increasing integration and influence of the environmental consideration within international legal frameworks, proposing potential shift towards heightened normative status in a journal article. Human Rights and Environmental Renex 2012 in a journal article International Environmental Law Bridging the Gap Between Theory and Practice 2018, Dupuy and Vernels highlight the dynamic transformative potential of environmental obligation within the broader context of international law, noting their growing relevance and possible elevation to jus cogens norm through continued international recognition and stack practice. Recommendations arising from this detailed analysis are manifold. Firstly, both states should pursue mediated negotiation, perhaps through the UN Environment Programme, to diplomatically address breaches and renegotiate updated treaty terms that reflect current environmental realities. Such diplomatic solutions align with the Vienna Convention emphasis on a peaceful dispute resolution. Secondly, updating environmental safeguard provision within the treaty to incorporate climate change impact explicitly would proactively mitigate future disputes, enhancing treaty relevance and resilience. The approach aligns the journal article International Environmental Law Bringing the Gap Between Theory and Practice 2018 by Dupuy and Vanellis. Finally, advocating for a clearer international recognition and consistent practice around environmental obligation can gradually elaborate certain critical norms, potentially establishing them explicitly as jus cogens. Achieving this will provide robust legal foundation for future environmental protection endeavors internationally. In conclusion, the legality of America Treaty suspension significantly relies upon substanting Botuna repeated and substantive breaches. Botuna invocation of rebel state standards demand compelling evidence of radically alter treaty obligation due to fundamental change impact. Additionally, the argument asserting environmental obligation as jus cogens necessitates broad international consensus and consistent state practice, a trajectory currently evolving yet incompletely. Ultimately, proactive diplomatic engagement, treaty adaptation, and clearer normative recognition of environmental standards present the most effective solution for addressing such international treaty dispute. Thank you very much. That's all from me, Miss Nadia.